All right, we are going to get underway. Welcome to our Secretary Speaker Series and happy Halloween for those who are celebrating. Also, happy almost Native American Heritage Month, which we celebrate in November. More on that at the tail end of our discussion. My name is Wade Crowfoot, and I serve as our Natural Resources Secretary, which means that I lead a big, broad agency stewarding California's environment, including a lot of entities that we'll talk to today that do work in our Sacramento-San Joaquin Bay Delta. If you're new to our speaker series, know that it's a public dialogue where we lift up big ideas, key priorities, thinkers, leaders from across the state driving forward on our environmental work. And we're really excited to be in conversation with a lot of these leaders here today to talk about our Delta. A few housekeeping items. First of all, this will be a recorded discussion. So in about 24 to 48 hours, you can log on to our resources agency website and download the recording of this or share this with others. Also, during our discussion today, we'll use the chat function. My colleague Geeta Chandra will be populating the chat with various web links that provide background on our speakers, as well as providing informational content on topics as they come up today. So be sure, if you can, to open the chat function. There's also a Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. So at any point during our discussion today, you want to lodge a question into our discussion or share an observation, you can do so. And our panelists will see that, and we'll work to integrate your questions into our discussion. Really excited to jump into our conversation today, and I'll just share a little bit on the genesis of this discussion. And I'll also ask Geeta, if she could, to share the list of speakers, if she hasn't already. And she'll do that in just a moment, and I'll be able to talk us through who's joining us today. But the genesis of our discussion is a recognition that I've had over the last 5 years in this role, that there are a lot of Californians that don't know too much about the Bay Delta. And many of the folks that know something of the Delta shy away from better understanding this incredible place because it's viewed as either too complicated or too conflict-ridden. So we thought it was a great opportunity to step back and to level set, bring more people into this discussion around the Bay Delta and all it provides the state. As I've shared before, the Bay Delta is so important on so many dimensions. Environmentally, it's a biodiversity hotspot. It's host to a range of life, whether it's fish and birds and actually terrestrial wildlife. In a biodiverse state, it's a hotspot of biodiversity within that state. It's a home to many Californians in small towns and even large urban settings. A lot of people are making their lives in the Delta, from the Delta, and have done that for multiple generations. It's also an important location for our state's water system, given that most of the Sierra Nevada and our state's snowpack drains into the tributaries of the San Joaquin and Sacramento rivers, and ultimately through those river systems into the Delta. Some of that water is diverted from the Delta or exported from the Delta for use from all places from the Bay Area down to the Central Valley in Southern California. And then a lot of that water continues to push through the Delta into the San Francisco Bay, which is really important for environmental purposes, as well as water use for those that are farming in the Delta, and also to control salinity and keep salinity at bay for our water system. So the Delta is really important for myriad reasons, and we'll unpack those today. So as you see in the chat, we're joined by a lot of our leaders in state government and in other governments that are focused on the Bay Delta. I'll start by, in a moment, introducing Jessica Pearson, my colleague who leads the Delta Stewardship Council. We'll hear from Ivan Senak, who works for the Buena Vista Rancheria of Miwok Indians as the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. We'll hear from Blake Roberts, who helps to lead the Delta Protection Commission. And we'll hear more about that entity that's been created by our legislature. And then we'll hear from our colleague Campbell Ingram, who leads the Conservancy focused on the Delta, doing good work. We'll hear from Jay Ziegler, who holds the title of Delta Watermaster, but a lot of us know Jay from his very long work through the Nature Conservancy. And last but not least, we'll talk to Carla Namath, who many of us know across the state, who of course leads our Department of Water Resources, which has a big operation and presence in the Delta. So let me start off with Jessica and bring Jessica into the conversation. And I've asked Jessica to help us level set our understanding of the Bay Delta and give us a little bit of a 101, as it were, on the Bay Delta in terms of where it is, how it functions. That will help in the rest of our conversation over the next hour. Welcome, Jessica.
Thanks, Wade. I'm happy to.
I'll turn it over to you. So how do you describe the Delta to folks that don't live there or work there on a regular basis?
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm happy to give a bit of a Delta 101 and happy to be here with all of you talking about the Delta and representing the Delta Stewardship Council. Delta Stewardship Council was created by the legislature in 2009 as an independent state agency. We have planning and oversight authorities in the region. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of background before we launch into our talk here today. So geographically speaking, the Delta is located in Northern California and lies inland from the San Francisco Bay. And we have a slide that I would ask that we put up with a map. Okay, thank you for that. So it can be really hard to comprehend the Delta's geography and really its sheer size from the ground. So I find it helpful to look at a map like this, which really gives folks a better sense of what we refer to as the legal Delta. Now, of course, this map does not show the upstream watershed where that water flows through the Delta, falls as rain or as snow and is collected. Nor does it show the areas of the Central Valley, the coast, and Southern California, as Wade mentioned, where water that moves through the Delta is exported and used by farms, homes, ecosystems, and other industries. So as you can see from this map, the Delta empties to the bay. And one of the most important things to understand about the Delta is that it is influenced by the tides. And those tides ebb and flow and have a tremendous impact on the way that we must manage the Delta now and especially into the future. The inland Delta is formed by the confluence of two of California's major rivers, the Sacramento and the San Joaquin, hence the full name, the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. We also use the term Bay Delta when referring to the Delta and the San Francisco Bay together as a system. And the Delta is such a diverse landscape. It's carved into islands by a huge network of leveed canals, channels, and sloughs that feed into the San Francisco Bay. And the Delta is often referred to, as Wade did, as a biodiversity hotspot due to its varieties of fish, plants, birds, and more. And it has a diverse set of historic ecosystems ranging anywhere from seasonal wetlands, tidally influenced wetlands, to oak woodlands. That diversity is unfortunately under threat from climate change and from other human activity, but there is good news on that front, and I believe much more opportunity lies ahead for ecosystem investment and recovery, and a lot of the agencies here are working together towards that future. Of course, in addition to statewide interest in ecosystem health and water transport for California, many people live, work, and recreate in the Delta. And though the land use in the Delta is primarily agricultural, it also includes a lot of industrial uses, and it's surrounded by cities and dotted with towns and historic legacy communities. So we've got urban areas such as Stockton, Tracy, and West Sacramento nearby, but also these legacy communities with a rich history like Freeport, Clarksburg, Locke, Isleton, and others. And you'll hear more about that later. But because the Delta represents so much to so many, its management and its future are subject to controversy. But I like to think that's because so many people care so much about it. So I think, Wade, that's just a high-level Delta 101. And if you'd like, I can talk a bit more about the council.
Well, that was a tour de force in terms of helping us understand just the basics of the Delta. So if you would, Jessica, talk a little bit about the Delta Stewardship Council. I think it's been around for probably less than 20 years, and talk about the role that it plays in trying to achieve this balance.
Sure. So as I just mentioned, California relies on the Delta as a hub for moving water, but for agriculture, for biodiversity, recreation, traditional uses, cultural heritage, so much more. It's like that national parks logo of it's the land of many uses. And that aspect means that there's so many agencies, organizations, groups, and entities that have some role or an interest in governing or working in the Delta. And that's really, in a nutshell, why the Delta Stewardship Council was created in 2009 by the California legislature to be an independent agency working on these issues. We coordinate actions across all of those groups. We attempt to avoid or reduce conflict in the Delta. And moreover, we are to set a forward-thinking vision and management plan for the long-term health of the Delta. And we call this plan the Delta Plan. So the council is really uniquely equipped to lead on Delta issues. Nearly half of our staff makes up a Delta science program where we organize, we fund, and we try to communicate science to support those who are making decisions in the Delta. We're advised by a Delta lead scientist, a 10-member independent science board, and the intent by the legislature was truly to move towards a common set of goals for the Delta, which should be guided by the best science. So the council also has a role in regulating projects and land use in the Delta through a process known as Delta Plan Consistency, by which projects need to show that they're in line with a set of regulations intended to protect or advance the co-equal goals for the Delta, which is water supply reliability and ecosystem health, but also to protect the Delta as a place. So the council hears appeals to these projects in a formal review process and then decides whether projects can move forward based on that review. Recently, the council has been working to identify strategies to improve the way we address environmental justice and tribal justice in Delta management. We're also working to identify a broad range of climate adaptation strategies to ensure a more resilient Delta. And we're working to accelerate the pace of ecosystem restoration in the Delta. So as challenging as our agency's work is, it's equally rewarding given the importance of the Delta to future generations of Californians. So I'll end there, encourage people to check out our deltacouncil.ca.gov website, and my thanks to you, Wade.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jessica. And note that Geeta, our colleague, has put the link to the Stewardship Council in the chat. So the way I think about the Delta Stewardship Council is a real, like the central hub of planning in the Delta and, of course, action taking, whether that's habitat creation or preservation of farmland or updates of water infrastructure. All that has to go through the Delta Stewardship Council. So thanks, Jessica, to you and your team for all you do. Now, and next I want to bring on Ivan Senak, who serves as the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and the Cultural Resources Director of the Buena Vista Rancheria of Miwok Indians. Long before the Delta was the Delta that we know, with the geography, the makeup, all the development. This is, of course, is the original homelands, like all portions which we know as California, were the original homelands of tribal peoples. And so, Ivan, I'm so grateful that you've joined us, and we've asked you to talk about a little bit about what this place has meant to tribal communities for tens of thousands of years, and then, of course, what it continues to mean to tribes, given that tribal communities are very much present around the Delta across the state. So, Ivan, let me turn it to you.
Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. As we all know, the Delta is a hub of biodiversity. It is a unique place in the Western Hemisphere, if not the world. And it has been home to tribes since time immemorial. This is the heart, this is the core, and not just the image that was shown by my colleague Jessica Pearson at the Delta Stewardship Council, but the entire watershed of the Sacramento and San Joaquin and all the other watersheds that flow into both north and south. Buena Vista, I'm a representative of Buena Vista. I'm not a tribal member, but Buena Vista has been connected to the Delta since time immemorial. It is a place where not only humans inhabit the different various groups, and Buena Vista is one of multiple tribes, not the only tribe. There are all of our neighbors, all of the cousins to Buena Vista, all of the relatives from the bay all the way up to the peaks of the mountains. And when we speak about the Delta, we tribal knowledge indicates that the delta is from when the water and snow falls in the mountains until the waves of the ocean. So as a Miwok Yokut tribe, Buena Vista is fascinated with the flows of the Mokelumne River, the Calaveras River, the Cosumnes River, all the way through the legal delta and out to the ocean, and we wish to ensure protection. My department focuses on both tribal cultural resources, which are anything and everything significant to the culture and the foundations of Buena Vista. And that could be tule and willow, for example, the salmon that come every year that feed and nourish everyone's bodies. And this kind of engagement stems from time immemorial, as I indicated earlier, where tribes and families even would go and tend sections of river, care for sections of river, subsist off of those rivers. And even though archaeology and Western science can only place people here 15,000 years ago, we often operate from the sense that they have always been connected. This is where they come from. This is the landscape. And now with our history, which is very long, and we would need all day to go over that, but we share this environment, we share this landscape, and I'm very excited for people to hear about the heritage project going on by the Delta Protection Commission by Blake Roberts, so I'll leave that to him. But this landscape, the Central Valley, is the key and the foundation to all tribes and all of the people here now. Rivers are important. They were the original highways when you wanted to go see relatives in the bay or relatives up towards the Sutter Buttes. You would build a tule boat and spend time traveling. So these waterways are not just water. They're not just a commodity to be traded, but they're a place to really engage and what really connected all of humanity on the West Coast for tribes. From there, we, like in our current position, Buena Vista kind of seeks to increase tribal access through reconnection because of the long, more recent history of colonization and statehood and everything that came after that, but also to expand stewardship and government-to-government relations. As a representative, I consult in government-to-government in those kind of meetings. And the Delta is a place not only where these kind of meetings between governments occur, it is also a place where ceremonies and gathering and teaching occur. So the protection of the water, the protection of the species, the protection of locations even are important to many families that I represent, as well as the other tribes here.
Ivan, that's really very helpful to understand both the history, but the present engagement of tribal communities with the Delta. And I want to put a fine point on what you said about government to government consultation. You know, tribal governments in California and other parts of the United States are sovereign governments. And so we have an obligation to have a government to government consultation on issues of shared importance. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because that's something that we are proud in state government that we have improved on in terms of ensuring early, often, and meaningful government to government consultation, but something that we need to continue to improve on. So I really appreciate this perspective you bring, and I'm excited to bring you into the group conversation. Now you, Ivan, referenced Blake Roberts, who is a program manager at the Delta Protection Commission. We know as a DPC, it's an entity within our agency. And one of its central roles is really to protect the Delta as place, which is a phrase we use a lot in government. But if you could, Blake, break down for us, you know, the work of the Delta Protection Commission, and maybe a little bit stepping back, why it's important.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Secretary Crowfoot. I appreciate that introduction. I also wanted to thank Ivan Sinok for just the help that he has given us in terms of working on the National Heritage Area. And we're really excited to work with tribes, because that's going to be a critical part of our National Heritage Area going forward. So I'll talk about the commission first, and then I'll talk about the National Heritage Area. So my name is Blake Roberts. I'm a program manager for the Delta Protection Commission. Our executive director is Bruce Blodgett. The commission is comprised of 15 members, supervisors from each of the 5 Delta counties, 3 city representatives, 3 representatives of reclamation districts, and representatives from 4 state agencies, including the Natural Resources Agency. The legislature envisioned that the commission would serve as a voice for Delta residents, since most of the commission are local officials. The commission was created by the legislature in 1992 to prevent development in the Delta's rural agricultural core. After working to implement the Land Use and Resource Management Plan, the commission took on additional duties, including preparing numerous planning documents, such as the Economic Sustainability Plan, the Great California Delta Trail Master Plan, Socioeconomic Indicators Report, Community Action Plans, and Broadband Action Plans. In 2019, thanks to the efforts of Congressman John Garamendi and the late Senator Dianne Feinstein, Congress created the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta National Heritage Area, the first and only national heritage area in California. The commission is responsible for managing the National Heritage Area, which extends in a triangle from Vallejo in the west to West Sacramento and Lathrop in the east. It's very similar to the map that Jessica showed earlier. The western portion of the area includes urban, suburban, and industrial areas. The eastern portion is generally rural and agricultural, including a strain of some small communities along the Sacramento River. The second part of the title of this session, Stewarding California's Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, immediately makes me think of the second goal our stakeholders developed for our work as a national heritage area. Steward the heritage and culture of the Delta by identifying, preserving, conserving, and enhancing the unique identity, resources, and living traditions of the Delta. Why is stewardship of cultural and heritage resources in the Delta necessary? There are more reasons than I have time for here, but I wanted to touch upon a few while sharing a few images of the Delta resources. So thank you, James, for that. Cultural heritage shapes the identity of communities and individuals, providing a sense of belonging and continuity with the past. This is John Muir's former home inside the John Muir National Historic Site in Martinez. Upstairs was his scribble den, his messy office where he wrote many of his most important works. This wonderful place was almost single-handedly saved from destruction by a couple who made it their mission to restore the house. Due to their efforts, we are now able to visit a place that celebrates a man whose legacy shaped environmental consciousness in California and around the world. Second slide, please. Thank you. This shared heritage fosters mutual understanding, tolerance, and respect among diverse groups. This is the Port Chicago National Naval Memorial, north of Concord, where during the Second World War, 320 men, many of them African-American sailors, died instantly in an explosion that happened while the sailors were loading ships with munitions and bombs. The explosion led to the largest naval mutiny in U.S. history and subsequent trial. What happened at Port Chicago was a catalyst for the U.S. Navy to desegregate following the war. This memorial is now a place where visitors can recognize not just the sailors that died, but also those who endured prison because they were standing up for justice and equality. Next slide, please. Heritage sites attract visitors, generating economic benefits for local communities. This is the old sugar mill, a former sugar beet factory in Clarksburg that is now home to 14 wineries and numerous weddings and events throughout the year. This building symbolizes the changing Delta agricultural economy over the last century. Sugar beets have disappeared as a crop in the Delta. Many fields are now occupied by vineyards. Farm families in the area have adapted to changing times and have started their own wineries, including one of the biggest in the United States, Global Vineyards. Next slide, please. We are fortunate that we have the Muir House, Port Chicago, and the old sugar mill, but there are many places that still desperately need preservation and visitor services. One of the most celebrated places in the Delta is Locke, which is shown here, the most intact rural Chinese community in the United States and a National Historic Landmark. Despite the town's renown, Locke has buildings that are deteriorating and require structural support and the town really needs modernized fire protection and enhanced storytelling. That type of stewardship is where the National Heritage Area can assist and what we will be doing for years to come. We are now finalizing our management plan, which will guide our work for the next 10 to 15 years. We're looking forward to working with other state agencies, nonprofit organizations, on stewarding the Delta's precious cultural and heritage resources as we implement the plan. With that, I'll conclude my presentation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Blake. And I really appreciate you sharing those images. Incredible diversity of heritage sites across the Delta. And I have to say, when I moved to Sacramento and my family got to Locke, we were absolutely blown away with just the sort of the cultural richness of the place and the just the dedication that some folks have to keeping the history alive. And you can find that level of, historical richness in other places, including Isleton and so many other little towns. So thanks for the work that you and the Delta Protection Commission are doing. Really excited to understand how we can leverage the heritage site to really get the investment into the communities that will benefit the economy and these places as just cultural sites. So appreciate that.
Thank you.
I want to move to Campbell Ingram. Campbell leads one of 10 state conservancies we have within our agency, and Campbell and team are specifically focused on the Delta. Conservancies are really interesting entities created by state law that exist to bring resources and people and projects together to improve certain places. Campbell, you have a big, important job leading the conservancy and focused on the Delta. So talk a little bit about the conservancy's work and what you're most excited about in that work.
Great. Thank you, Wade. And thanks everyone for being here. It's great to be here with you on Halloween. Just to clarify, those are sandhill cranes in the Delta in my background and not bats flying around my head. So as Wade mentioned, the Delta Conservancy is one of 10 state conservancies. And like the Stewardship Council, we were created with the passage of the Delta Reform Act in 2009. So we've been in operation for about 13 years. You can really think of us as primarily a funding or grant-making entity, and also an implementer of the Delta Plan that Jessica described earlier. As a state conservancy, we work with the community that we serve, and in our case, that's the legal Delta and the Sassoon Marsh. And you see that commitment to community engagement, community involvement in the makeup of our board. We have an independent board that includes 5 county supervisors, as well as 6 other members, electeds, governor's appointees, Senate and Assembly appointees, as well as Secretary Crowfoot and the Director of Finance. We typically we have really 2 main focuses of our effort, and that's ecosystem restoration and economic development. For restoration, we focus on trying to improve ecological function and biodiversity in the Delta. And through the course of time, we funded over 30 projects that really do any type of restoration you could imagine, from restoring wetlands, riparian habitat and floodplain habitat, and also improving water quality within the Delta. And we always like to say that all of those projects have been approved by our board unanimously, and we require that all of our applicants demonstrate local support for those projects. So we're quite proud that these projects fit within the landscape, fit within the community, and are supported by the community. We also fund economic development in the Delta, and I think this dovetails nicely with a lot of what Blake talked about and the things that are happening in the Delta around the natural heritage area, and we hope to support that more in the future. To date, we've funded projects, several Delta Welcome Center efforts. This helps people understand what's available to them in the Delta and where they can come and enjoy and have access, and also hopefully spend some money while they're there. We funded projects that have developed parks and made park improvements, projects that have provided trail systems and even historic preservation of facilities in the Delta. We also work on nature-based solutions. We've been working to provide incentives to Delta farmers to address subsidence in the Delta. This is certainly one of the areas that we're most excited about. The Delta really is sort of 2 places. There is the deeply subsided region in the middle. You can think of about 200,000 acres kind of right in the center of the Delta that is deeply subsided, highly organic peat soils. And then the surrounding Delta, which is a little more mineral soils and more at tidal elevation. The subsidence continues. It's the result of microbial oxidation. It's essentially that carbon being digested and put into the atmosphere as CO2 as a result of drained agriculture. So we've been doing a lot of work in the past years trying to come up with incentives to get farmers to re-wet that land, consider alternative practices like rice or managed wetlands. that stops the subsidence. And just also want to mention that subsidence fundamentally threatens everything that we've talked about today. It threatens the communities, it threatens the agriculture, which is incredibly rich, as well as the state's water supply, because we have the pumps in the south of the Delta. So it's very important that we address this issue, and we think that we have incentives that make it possible for farmers to be economically viable now and into the future, but also stop going the wrong direction. One of the other activities that we've done recently is with a very large grant from the Department of Water Resources. We ran a drought response program at the height of the drought that incentivized farmers to change to less water consumptive irrigation practices. So that was very helpful in helping us learn how we might manage in future droughts moving forward. The Delta Conservancy also plays a role in planning processes, mostly around where we'll do restoration and how, looking at different regions in the Delta and really thinking through, all the elements of the current situation on the ground and where ecosystem restoration could fit on the landscape and where we might prioritize that restoration into the future. So I do want to say that everything that we do is in close partnership with the agencies you've heard from so far, as well as DWR and CDFW on the state side and all the federal agencies, of course, the Delta community and numerous NGO partners that really, make it all happen when we all work together. I think, Wade mentioned earlier that the Delta is a biodiversity hotspot. And of course, that just makes sense. California is a global biodiversity hotspot due to our climate and our geography. And estuaries are understood to be some of the most productive ecosystems on the planet. So the Delta, with its thousands or over 1,000 miles of waterways and 750 species, plants and animals, several of which are threatened and endangered, is really critical and very important to biodiversity within the state. And I just want to say that we're making progress. Our investments to date as a relatively small agency have affected over 9,000 acres in the Delta, just providing some sort of ecological increase or uplift. And when you combine that with Department of Water Resources and Department of Fish and Wildlife investments in what's called a program called Eco Restore that's addressing about 30,000 acres, it's a pretty impressive initial start. We've got a lot of work to do, but we're certainly making great progress. So that's really a quick overview of what the Delta Conservancy is up to, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and share that with you. It's great to see so many people interested in the Delta, and look forward to answering any questions later in the program.
Thanks, Campbell. Yeah, and I'll note, I think we have almost 400 people joining us here today, so I'm also excited with the interest in this discussion. And Campbell, I think one question to unpack as we come together in a group is, where do you as leaders in the Delta working with communities decide to do the environmental restoration that's so important and the wetting up of the fields to reduce subsidence, and where is important, to retain agricultural operations as they exist right now? So be interesting to unpack that a little bit. I want to bring on Jay Ziegler, longtime colleague of mine and who now works as the Delta Water Master. And Jay, if you can, first of all, that's a title that a lot of people probably will be confused about. So talk about what the Delta Water Master does, but also talk to us about how we manage water in the Delta, because of course that's a major flashpoint around ensuring water for agriculture, water for the environment, water for the rest of the state, and be helpful to just to break that down a little bit for us.
Oh, Mr. Secretary, great. And thank you for the opportunity to join you all for this discussion today. I'm very excited to actually share ideas about the future of the Delta. And I think a good place to start is the history of this position. Going back to Jessica's early framing, the Delta Conservancy, the Delta Stewardship Council, and the Office of the Delta Water Master were created as part of the Delta Reform Act in 2009. The Delta Water Master's role in all of this is to administer water rights in the legal Delta, a 750 square mile region, and it just to really it served the interests of both protecting water rights as well as water quality and throughout the legal Delta. And there are some 1,300 water rights holders throughout the Delta, principally in agriculture, but also cities and communities throughout the Delta that rely on the Delta as the source of its water supply. And of course, the state and federal water projects, which are at the southern end of the Delta and are wholly dependent upon water flowing through the Delta. And so we all have a common interest in water quality and meeting larger water sustainability objectives throughout the Delta region. And I really want to echo what Ivan talked about. Thinking about the Delta, if we might just pull up an image, a couple slides in here. I want to note that I found it almost poetic to talk to tribes about the Delta, because if you look at the Delta region, it forms a heart in shape, and that really symbolizes the center of California's circulatory system in this 1,000-mile long watershed or catchment basin. So as we think about the Delta and the 750,000 acres, most of which is in irrigated agriculture, it's also really important, I think, to go back to Ivan's framing of this discussion, and Jessica's as well, that what we really have here is an incredibly complex region that has different elevations, different crops that are growing in different regions, different biodiversity patterns, different flood threats, different threats to water quality, and that we put this mosaic together in a creative way that helps to advance sustainability, water supply, and larger goals in thinking about how do we protect this incredibly unique region for all Californians to enjoy. And so at the center of that is water. And we are at the State Water Resources Control Board just embarking on an update to the California Bay Delta Water Quality Plan to really help address some of these threats to species that we've been talking about, to make the Delta a more sustainable place for salmon. Salmon migrate into and out of the Delta in their life cycle. To better protect habitat values there, better protect water quality, and better protect recreation and all of the values that we have been talking about here in terms of this complex landscape that is recognized as formally 57 islands. But as you walk across the Delta, you'll find almost 200 islands of some size or dimension in this really interesting mosaic of upland habitat, where we find oaks, where lower floodplain habitat, and traditional marsh ecosystems that used to represent that whole 750,000 acres. So at the center of this, the Delta Water Masters challenge is to balance those water rights in service to water quality and protecting the environment that we know as the Delta today, and responding to these unique challenges, which range from subsidence and protection of the levees to ensure flow and water quality, as well as protecting the Delta as a place, and all of these extraordinary unique cultural assets that have really emerged throughout the Delta, and yet to be mindful that we need to really find a way to incorporate traditional tribal scientific knowledge and practices in thinking about sustainability of the Delta and the use and response of Tule Marsh and other natural systems that really have benefited the Delta and make it so unique as a recreational destination, as a farming center, as a cultural resource for all Californians to enjoy. And so with all those that are gathered here, it's really a pleasure to be embarked on this journey and how we achieve a more sustainable balance in the Delta.
Hey, thanks so much. You know, one point that you made really sticks with me, which is the Delta is a mosaic, and it's a place of places. So we can't think of it as all, one type of landscape. It's as Campbell said, different regions of the Delta have different functions and different needs moving forward. I also want to lift up something you said, which is, we have another key state agency that's not part of the conversation today, but plays an important role in the Delta, and that is our State Water Resources Control Board. A lot of folks on this Zoom may know that our state water board and the regional boards not only oversee or administer water rights, but also ensure the quality of our river systems, both for environmental purposes and water quality purposes and recreation. And as Jay noted, they are currently undertaking an update of their water quality plan for the Sacramento-San Joaquin systems and the Bay Delta. And that's really quite important to ensure that this whole system continues to function effectively for all of those needs. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Jay. Last, I want to introduce Carla Namath. And again, Carla leads the Department of Water Resources, which is one of the key state leaders on all things water in California. Carla, welcome. I think a lot of people know DWR for its work helping administer the State Water Project, which is this collection of reservoirs and conveyances that provides water to upward of 27 million Californians. But as you've educated me, DWR is active in the Delta in a lot of ways that people may not fully understand, whether it's flood safety or habitat restoration, or even tackling harmful algal blooms. So can you just talk about sort of the scope of DWR's attention and actions in the Delta?
Sure. Thank you, Secretary. And it's really terrific to join so many of my colleagues here to talk about the Delta. It is a very special area for so many of the reasons that have already been enumerated. But you are right. While the Department of Water Resources does own and operate what's called the State Water Project, which essentially moves water through the sort of Delta channels, if you will, to pumps that are located in the South Delta. And we do that in coordination with the Central Valley Project, which of course is owned and operated by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. But there's a lot of other things that the department is working on in the Delta. You've touched on some of them. Flood protection is a key piece of the department's work. We do that in partnership with our colleagues at the Delta Stewardship Council under the Delta Levee Investment Strategy. And of course, flood funding is something that is just really important to me as the director of DWR and working in flood in so many of California's counties. But the Delta really is in many ways uniquely vulnerable to flooding. In 2006, for example, on a June day, a levee gave way over more kind of in the Western Delta in an area called Frank's Tract. And it just really as a result of boreholes made by rodents and other just physical challenges that we have with these levees that were either are sitting on peat soils or sort of use really dirt materials and that have been around for more than 100 years. With the ongoing pressures of sea level rise or really large storm events that we can anticipate happening with more intensity, maybe not greater frequency. We expect deeper, longer droughts, but real punctuated, intense storm events. We know that there is a lot of fragility there. So that is something that the department is working on. We are also working on with a colleague at UC Davis, a pilot program for community-based flood insurance over in the community of Isleton. We know the National Flood Insurance Program works in some places in the U.S., maybe less well in California. And we are, again, especially with increasing climate risk, looking for ways in which we can establish different models that are going to keep our communities safer. It's really, as plain as that in the work that we need to do. But there are a couple of active flood projects that I think are really worth mentioning in the South Delta in particular, because they also combine flood protection with important environmental restoration. One is called the Mossdale Tract, and that is in the southern part of the Delta, and it is designed to protect some urbanized areas, about 45,000 people in the Stockton-Lathrop area. This is a levee project that will protect about $12.5 billion of assets. So very important for those communities. And those communities are required to have 200-year flood protection by 2028. And so a lot of work underway there. I'm excited that we have one project that a part of this project that will be completed at the end of this year. It's in partnership with Reclamation District 17, and that actually just brings things up to about 100-year flood protection level. And I think that's a real reflection on how far we have to go in California in terms of next generation approach to not just flood management, but flood funding, because we know climate is just really going to supercharge it. But we expect this piece of the project to be done by the end of this year. And then in 2022, the department completed a feasibility study with the local reclamation districts. And what's important about that is the Corps of Engineers needs to come in and do their own feasibility study around federal interest in flood protection, and they typically won't do that unless the state and local partners do their part of that work first. And what's really crucial about that, and the department is very much engaged in, is working with the Corps, commenting on the Corps' policies so that the Corps thinks more broadly about lower income communities and the effects of climate on what we call these kind of frontline communities that are going to feel the brunt and the injury of these big storm events sooner than other communities. They tend to be more low income communities. They tend to be communities that are maybe located in the floodplains. And we really want the Corps to think about that when they understand the federal interest and they understand these cost benefit analysis that aren't really poised to serve our community needs into the future. The other real exciting project is called Paradise Cut. And that is really a combination of levee work, but also restoring the floodplain in that part of the Delta. So some folks are familiar with the work the department has been doing in the Yolo bypass in the north to reactivate that floodplain and introduce salmon back onto their historical habitat, give them an opportunity to eat food, get a little fatter, make it out to the ocean a little bit later, because that's more in sync with the timing of food availability in the ocean. So we're looking at restoring that kind of floodplain action down in the southern part of the Delta too. It also has a really important agricultural benefit in that part of the Delta because that system's not working very well. A lot of the local growers in that area have trouble accessing their water supply because of the way Paradise Cut isn't functioning optimally right now. And so that's also a part of the project where we can restore their more predictable, reliable access to water supplies. And I mentioned that one because it's a really terrific convergence of flood protection, environmental restoration, salmon restoration, but also making sure that we're supporting agriculture in the Delta and these broader notions of Delta as place. And then finally, Secretary, another really important project is the South Delta Operable Gates. Typically what happens is, especially when we have dry conditions, if people haven't gotten the climate flag yet, we had not done rock barriers to repel salinity in the Delta really since the intense drought in the mid-1970s. But we did it in 2015 and we did it again in this most recent drought. So you get a flavor of these deepening, more intense drought conditions. And, things that we used to do as a department, in sort of just sort of an extraordinary emergency are becoming more commonplace. And so we are looking for a more permanent solution in the Delta, and that is to install operable gates in the southern part of the Delta to help repel salinity intrusion when we have these really, really dry conditions. To me, it's really important because it is an opportunity to maybe bring together water users who are often very much at odds with one another. And in this case, it's the state and federal water projects, but also water users in the South Delta, which also really need projects to enable during these extreme drought conditions to protect that water quality that they're also drawing from in that South Delta. And this is a project that will help do it. And one of the things we're really investigating with our colleagues at the Water Resources Control Board, and I also want to just say a huge hat tip to the Stewardship Council that is putting together this Delta Adapts strategy, which is a longer looking strategy at how to make the Delta itself more resilient. But we know that we need to get going on these projects right now. And one of these issues that has just been very challenging are these harmful algal blooms, particularly in that part of the Delta. And that makes that water really dangerous. You don't want to be swimming in it. You don't want your pets in it. And you certainly don't want to be consuming it. And one of the things that we're examining as it relates to these South Delta operable gates is, are there ways in which we can reduce the frequency of those algal blooms when we have these extremely dry conditions? And it's a very challenging problem that, there's a lot of different components to it, but really these opportunities to look at problems from all sorts of angles and bring more folks together, I think is going to be really important in the future. And then lastly, I'll say my picture is Lookout Slough, which is a relatively new habitat project. What's exciting about it is it's really doing something at scale, meaning about 3,000 acres, and it is breaching a levee and having these sloughs really reemerge in this critical area to provide food for fish and habitat for fish and for waterfowl. If you haven't been out there, it's really incredible. There will be some public access points for people to come and see the system as it used to be. Not exactly as it used to be, but it really is significantly altered. And anything we can do at scale to reintroduce this more channelization, that's really going to help stabilize this biodiversity hotspot. So just a huge thanks to folks that I've had the opportunity to work with, Jessica and Campbell and Jay and Blake. We look forward to working with you as well, because there's so much happening in the Delta, and with climate, it is a very vulnerable environment, and we have real opportunities for new solutions, also with our tribal partners, new solutions that do more than we've done in the past. So thank you very much.
Carla, thank you. And that was a sort of a tour de force in terms of all the work that DWR is doing in the Delta. Let's bring everybody back together in a group. We talked about a mosaic of landscapes in the Delta. This is a mosaic of entities working in the Delta. And just to, sort of summarize this, we've got, a focus on preserving cultural and historic legacy. That's tribal governments, that's the Delta Protection Commission, particularly through the National Heritage Site. Enabling the continued economic vitality of Delta towns and communities. That's the Protection Council, that's the Conservancy. Ensuring public safety, Carla touched on that, Department of Water Resources, Army Corps, local reclamation districts, maintaining those levees. Restoring environmental habitat, given that we've lost so much of it in the Delta. The Conservancy, our Fish and Wildlife Department, DWR. Building climate resilience, really everyone's task. And the Delta Stewardship Council that Jessica explained at the top of our discussion is really kind of at the hub, ensuring that all of these needs get balanced. So it's complex and critically important. We have so many good questions that have come in, including some basic ones like, what does subsided mean? Sometimes we use complex governmental words. That just basically means the ground is sinking below the water level. To other questions like, is Stockton in the National Heritage Site? Give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down, Blake. Okay, not yet, or not right now. I think this may beg a subsequent discussion, public discussion, and to get more of these questions answered, because we're near the top of the hour. So I want to ask one sort of speed round question for everybody, and if you can answer in a phrase or a sentence or two, and that is, what are your hopes for the Delta? If we're successful in 10 or 20 years, what looks different? What looks the same in the Delta? Tough question, I know, but if you can just share a little bit of your future vision, starting with Jessica.
Thanks, Wade. I think it looks like partnerships, true partnerships. It looks like a lot of investment. And then the desired outcome there is resiliency. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's go to Ivan.
I'm gonna borrow Jessica's a little bit, because collaboration, and you said it perfectly, Secretary Crowfoot, early, often, and meaningful, with local solutions where everybody is at the table. Tribes, environmental justice communities, agencies, everybody sits down and works together on the problems that we're facing, not only with climate, but with these droughts and these floods that we're all facing here in the future. Just more collaboration, more engagement, and collective management reality.
Thank you so much, Ivan. Blake.
I'm gonna, I agree with all that, but I think one of the things that I wanted to mention is that people really don't know where the Delta is and don't know about the Delta. And so for me, in 20 years, if people think of the Delta in the same way they think about Monterey Bay or Lake Tahoe or Yosemite as a treasure and a place that we want to preserve, I think that would be a win for us.
That's a great one. I appreciate that. Over to Campbell.
Yeah, it's hard to top that, Blake. That's really spot on. Yeah, I think we've reached a point where we're really gaining momentum on restoration and economic investment in the Delta. And so I think in 10 to 20 years, if we can maintain sustained levels of investment, keep the funding coming in, we're going to see the benefits of that. We're just going to see a more sustainable Delta economically as well as ecologically. And it's going to be visible. I mean, we're already seeing large landscape level projects out there, and it's a region that needs help, but it's also within our reach. We can make real progress over the next 10 years. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Over to Jay.
The panel's given you a great list. I would also add to that my aspiration would be that we see more transparent, open science so that we can understand the complexities of the Delta together and work on those issues in a more open fashion to really find the sustainable solutions for people, agriculture, and the environment in the Delta.
Thank you. Carla.
I second everything that everybody has said, and I would say on the spirit of collaboration, I would love to see more regional governance. We're all state agencies, and the counties, working together. They're represented on a lot of state agency bodies, but so much is really in their hands relative to how we craft a vision for the future. And so I'm really eager to see the next generation of local leaders emerge and define their vision for the Delta. I want to be a really big supporter of that, because that's where some of that durability lives over time. And I'm really excited for the next generation to come at it with fresh eyes and a real approach to climate resiliency. So thank you.
Carla, thank you. And just to channel some of the questions and comments that are coming in, one question from some folks is, gosh, a whole hour went by talking about the Delta and you didn't talk about conveyance or the proposed tunnel. So I don't want to suggest that we're hiding the ball on the proposal from our administration to update conveyance in the form of that tunnel. But we thought it was important, because there's so much focus on that when we talk about the Delta, to step back and look at it more broadly and holistically. And the way I think about it is, whether that project comes to fruition or not, and really whatever project occurs in the future, the Delta will continue to exist, and it will be a place that thrives for people and nature or doesn't. And so while we, unpack all of these challenging questions around future infrastructure through the Delta, the management, this updated Delta water quality plan, it's really important that we also recognize that we have a lot of work to do around cultural and historic legacy, environmental restoration, public safety, et cetera, that are separate from those specific proposals and regulations. And then just lots of good questions around innovation. How could regenerative farm practice reduce harmful algal blooms in the South Delta? How do we ensure that water rights can be adjudicated, allow people to farm, but do so in ways that limit subsidence, which is a topic that's happening. A lot of good innovation or good questions around innovation. So I thank everybody for joining, panelists, and for those of you who are joining from across California. We're going to have people from across the state. Hopefully you learned more about the Delta and how we're working to manage it. All of these folks that you've heard from are accessible moving forward. I want to ask James to put up the slide that shares our next speaker series, which will be in just about a week, with an internationally award-winning author called Ben Goldfarb. He's just wrote what I think is a New York Times bestseller about wildlife crossings, how transportation networks have wreaked havoc across ecosystems around the planet, and what we're doing to reconnect habitat across this network. Some good news stories with a lot of progress ahead in California and beyond. And James, next slide. And then just a sneak peek on our Native American Heritage Month, which kicks off tomorrow to begin November. We have an exciting set of events, including, if you're in Sacramento, joining us at our Natural Resources Agency headquarters. We have a food truck called Bigfoot Fry Bread, which I believe is the one of the only of its kind in the Sacramento region that is run by a Native American business serving that cuisine. That's a great innovative thing we're doing. We also have a screening of a movie called Saging the World on November 13th here at our headquarters. And then we also have another secretary speaker series like the one we just had, really lifting up Native voices on traditional ecological knowledge and how that informs advocacy across the state. So please join us in one or more of these. You have a link on your website. Once again, panelists, thanks for all the work that you do in the Delta. And if anybody that's tuned in today has a suggestion or a question or a request, please email us at the email that you see here. Take care. Have a great